Once upon a time, in a bustling office environment, a woman named Jasmine entered the workplace with dreams in her heart and hope as her guiding light. She was determined to prove herself, just like anyone else who walked through the doors of that corporate building. Yet there was something about her that set her apart, something that unfortunately caused some to view her as different in a way that didn't align with the norms of the office. Jasmine, a confident and talented black woman, found herself in a sea of colleagues who had already formed their own bonds, cliques, and judgments. She had come from a strong, tight-knit community where respect and loyalty were paramount. Yet, in the world of corporate politics, things were different. Her colleagues didn't seem to see the person she was. Instead, they focused on her appearance, her skin color, and perhaps most sadly of all, the assumptions they made based on her identity. It wasn't just a fleeting moment of discomfort. No, it became a pattern. Jasmine's ideas, often brilliant and full of potential, were dismissed with a casual wave or a comment that undermined her authority. Her suggestions were brushed aside, and when a mistake occurred, fingers pointed directly at her, even when she had no part in the error. These moments, though subtle, added up. The office environment that should have been welcoming and collaborative instead became a place of silent struggle for Jasmine. The mockery was more than just the words spoken in the break room or behind her back. It came in subtle forms. The giggles that followed after she spoke up in meetings, the dismissive tone from her colleagues when she addressed an issue, and the skeptical stare she received whenever she walked into a room. The worst part? She had to smile through it all, pretending as if it didn't hurt, pretending that their mockery didn't sting deep within her soul. But Jasmine was strong. She didn't let these hurtful moments define her. She continued working, continued proving her worth, and quietly navigated the hostility that surrounded her. She believed, deep down, that one day the people who mocked her, who underestimated her, would have to reckon with the truth. That day wasn't far away, even if it felt like the world was conspiring against her. She knew that things couldn't stay this way forever. However, there was an important lesson that Jasmine had learned over time. The weight of mockery could either break a person or shape them into something greater. Jasmine, with her resilience, was beginning to lean into the shaping process. Every time they mocked her, she used it as fuel. Every sneer was a reminder of the fire inside her that refused to be extinguished. What her colleagues didn't realize was that they were sowing the seeds of their own downfall. In their arrogance, they failed to see the remarkable potential in the woman they so casually overlooked. Little did they know that the tides were about to turn in ways they couldn't have possibly imagined. The very same people who laughed at her dreams would soon be left speechless, staring at her in awe, as they watched her rise to a place they never thought she would reach. Jasmine was about to prove that their mockery was the spark she needed to ignite her own journey toward greatness. They had underestimated her, but she was going to show them what happens when you mock someone with determination and untapped power. The days turned into weeks, and Jasmine found herself increasingly attuned to the ebb and flow of the office dynamics. She kept her head down and her eyes forward, focusing on what she knew best, her work. Her colleagues, those who had once dismissed her, now began to notice her quiet strength and unwavering commitment. Jasmine didn't let the petty remarks or the condescending attitudes stop her. Instead, she leaned into her expertise, offering solutions where others only saw problems, and outworking her peers without needing to say a word. As time passed, Jasmine's efforts didn't go unnoticed. Her reputation as someone who could deliver results became undeniable. What they had once written off as just another woman trying to make it, they now had to admit was a force to be reckoned with. Slowly, the atmosphere in the office began to shift, and Jasmine, though still navigating through the mockery and condescension, found herself moving from the outskirts to a place of prominence. Yet, she never allowed herself to get caught up in the shifting tides of office politics. She remained focused on her own journey and on the work that mattered most. But things were about to change dramatically. One fateful day, an email went out announcing the promotion of a new boss, someone who had been working hard behind the scenes to make a real difference. Jasmine, unaware that this announcement would change the course of her career forever, simply read the words on her screen. The name that followed, however, sent ripples through her chest. It was her name. Jasmine had been chosen as the new leader of the department. Her heart skipped a beat. She had heard of such promotions happening to others, but she had never expected it to happen to her, especially not after all the years of mockery and doubt she had endured. In that moment, the gravity of her achievement hit her like a wave crashing against the shore. But the most startling thing wasn't the promotion itself. It was the silence that followed. The very same colleagues who had once laughed at her ideas, ignored her contributions, and ridiculed her presence, now looked at her with a mix of disbelief and apprehension. They couldn't believe their eyes. Jasmine, the woman they had so carelessly mocked, was now their boss. It was as if time had frozen. Jasmine stood at the center of the office, holding the power that had once been denied to her, the power that they never thought she would attain. And as she walked into the conference room for her first meeting as the new boss, there was a moment of pure satisfaction that swelled in her chest. The very same people who had doubted her were now looking to her for guidance, for leadership, and perhaps most of all, for the validation they had once denied her. But Jasmine wasn't gloating. No, she was humble. She understood that the road to this point hadn't been easy. She had worked tirelessly for years to earn this position. The mockery, the condescending remarks, they were just part of the journey. They didn't define her. They were merely stepping stones along the path to her ultimate success. She could have easily used this moment to throw her success in their faces. She could have made them eat their words, but she chose not to. Jasmine knew that true power came not from belittling others, but from lifting them up. She had always believed in the value of hard work, respect, and kindness. As she sat at the head of the table, ready to lead her team, her demeanor was calm and collected, her presence commanding respect, but her heart was filled with compassion. Her new role wasn't just about authority. It was about influence, change, and opportunity. She wasn't interested in playing games or holding grudges. Instead, Jasmine was focused on creating an environment where everyone, regardless of their background, their past, or their mistakes, had the chance to thrive. After all, she had been given that same chance, even when it seemed like the world was working against her. And as her first week as boss came to a close, Jasmine could feel the subtle shift in the air. The mockers, those who had once viewed her as nothing more than a black woman trying to fit into a white-dominated corporate world, now looked at her with newfound respect. The tables had turned, and they knew they had underestimated the power of perseverance, intelligence, and grace. But the most satisfying part? Jasmine didn't need to say a word. Her actions, her success, and her leadership spoke louder than anything else. Her rise to power wasn't just about her own personal victory. It was a victory for every person who had been doubted, overlooked, or mocked. As Jasmine settled into her new role, the challenges were far from over. In fact, they were just beginning. She had spent years proving herself, enduring mockery and bias. But now, she had to prove herself in an entirely different way. Being the boss wasn't just about taking control. It was about leading with vision, compassion, and integrity. Jasmine wasn't just determined to be a boss. She was determined to be a leader who would inspire, empower, and elevate those around her. At first, the room was tense in meetings. The same individuals who had once belittled her were now sitting in front of her, trying to adjust to the new power dynamic. They were accustomed to a world where they held the reins, where their voices were the ones that shaped decisions, and where Jasmine was nothing more than an invisible face in the background. But now the power had shifted. Jasmine was the one making the decisions, the one who was steering the ship, and she was determined to guide it in a direction that reflected her values: fairness, inclusivity, and transparency. It didn't take long for Jasmine to realize that leadership wasn't just about making decisions. It was about creating an environment where people felt seen and heard. Her first order of business was to meet with each member of her team individually. She didn't want to inherit their judgments or their preconceived notions about her. Instead, she wanted to know them as individuals, what motivated them, what their challenges were, and how she could support them in their roles. Her approach was met with some skepticism at first. The same people who had once doubted her abilities now questioned her leadership style. Is this really how a boss should act? Some of them whispered behind her back. They were used to a more authoritarian figure, someone who commanded respect with an iron fist. But Jasmine wasn't that kind of leader. She believed in the power of collaboration, trust, and shared success. She wasn't trying to control her team. She was trying to guide them, to bring out the best in each of them. And slowly, things began to change. Jasmine's colleagues, who had once dismissed her as too soft or too emotional, began to see the strength in her approach. They saw the way she listened without judgment, the way she encouraged open dialogue, and the way she made tough decisions with both grace and conviction. She wasn't afraid to stand up for what was right, and she wasn't afraid to hold others accountable when they didn't meet expectations. Yet, even in moments of conflict, Jasmine always found a way to remain composed and fair. Her authority didn't come from fear. It came from her ability to balance empathy with firmness. As weeks passed, Jasmine's leadership began to bear fruit. Productivity in the office increased. Morale began to shift. The once fractured team began to come together, united under a common goal: success. Her ability to see the potential in her colleagues and foster an environment of mutual respect was transforming the entire department. People who had once resented her for her perceived weakness now admired her for her strength. Strength that came not from dominating others, but from empowering them. And then, one day, Jasmine found herself facing a moment of truth. A senior executive from another department, someone who had always been a staunch critic of her promotion, walked into her office with a look of determination on his face. He had never been one to mince words, and Jasmine knew this meeting wasn't going to be easy. He had always been one of those who doubted her, who believed that her race and gender made her unfit for a leadership role. But now, it seemed, he had come to challenge her. The conversation started off tense, with him criticizing her recent decisions and questioning her methods. Jasmine listened patiently, taking in his words, but also noticing the subtle undercurrent of frustration. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something about Jasmine's leadership was making him uncomfortable. For years, he had been used to controlling the narrative, used to being the one with the answers. But now, here she was, not just making waves, but creating a ripple effect throughout the entire company. Rather than getting defensive or combative, Jasmine leaned forward, maintaining her calm, confident composure. She didn't have to explain herself. Instead, she asked him one simple question: "What do you think our team needs to succeed?" The question threw him off balance. For a moment, he was silent, caught off guard by the simplicity and depth of it. He had expected her to fight back, to assert her authority in a way that would make him back down. But Jasmine wasn't interested in fighting for the sake of fighting. She was interested in finding solutions, in improving things for everyone. And in that moment, something shifted within him. "Well," he finally said, "I suppose the team needs a clear vision, and they need someone they can trust." Jasmine smiled, but there was no hint of arrogance or superiority. Instead, her expression conveyed the quiet strength of someone who had already earned the trust of her team through actions, not words. "I agree," she said softly, "and that's exactly what we're building together." The conversation didn't end with a dramatic shift in his perspective, but it was a small victory nonetheless. Jasmine had taken a moment of conflict and turned it into an opportunity for dialogue and growth. She wasn't just challenging her colleagues to accept her position, she was challenging them to see leadership in a new light. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine's leadership continued to resonate throughout the department. People who had once mocked her were now seeking her advice, respecting her decisions, and even following her lead. Jasmine had proven, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the strength of her leadership came from within, not from the color of her skin, not from her gender, but from the depth of her character and the power of her vision. Jasmine's rise to leadership wasn't just a triumph of competence. It was a powerful statement about resilience and breaking barriers. As a black woman in a predominantly white-collar, predominantly white environment, she had to navigate challenges that many of her colleagues could never truly understand. The road she walked was paved with obstacles, discrimination, microaggressions, biases, and assumptions that sought to undermine her at every turn. One of the most striking aspects of Jasmine's experience was the subtle nature of the racism and sexism she faced. It wasn't always overt. There were no blatant racial slurs or open hostility. Instead, it manifested in quieter, more insidious ways. She would be interrupted in meetings, her ideas would be dismissed until someone else, usually a white male colleague, repeated the same point, at which time it would be met with approval. She would be asked to take on supportive roles, such as organizing events or managing logistics, rather than being entrusted with the high-stakes projects that her colleagues were given. And when she did take on a leadership role, her authority was often questioned more than that of her white counterparts. At times, the microaggressions felt like a heavy weight pressing down on her, reminding her constantly that her worth was being measured against unfair standards. But Jasmine had learned over the years that resilience wasn't about ignoring these challenges. It was about acknowledging them, facing them head-on, and rising above them. In one of the most telling moments of her career, Jasmine had to confront a deeply ingrained bias that had gone unchecked for far too long. During a major presentation to the board, she had worked tirelessly to prepare a proposal that she knew would shift the company's direction and bring about real change. She had done everything right, researched thoroughly, prepared data-driven arguments, and rehearsed her delivery. But as soon as she walked into the room, she could feel the skepticism in the air. The senior executives barely looked up from their papers as she began speaking. There was an underlying sense of doubt in the room, an almost palpable disbelief that a woman, especially a black woman, could be the one presenting such an important proposal. She was used to it by now, but it still stung. As she made her case, she could see their eyes glaze over, their minds seemingly elsewhere. Then, when she finished her presentation and opened the floor for questions, one of the senior members, a man in his 50s, asked her the same question that had become all too familiar to her. But where's the data to support this? It was a question that no one had asked the previous presenter, a white male colleague, who had given a less detailed proposal. Jasmine took a deep breath and answered the question with calm precision, walking the board through the metrics and demonstrating how her proposal would not only improve profits, but also set the company up for long-term success. But the subtle nature of the bias lingered. It wasn't the first time her credibility had been questioned simply because of who she was, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. Despite the subtle undermining, Jasmine remained resolute. She had a point to prove, not just for herself, but for the countless women of color who would follow in her footsteps. She knew that to truly be a leader in this world, she couldn't just rise above the biases. She had to dismantle them, bit by bit, with every interaction, every decision, and every success. It wasn't long before her persistence began to pay off. When the results of her proposal came back and exceeded expectations, the board's tune changed. They couldn't deny her success. Her data had been sound, her approach had been innovative, and most importantly, she had delivered on her promises. Jasmine's achievements began to speak for themselves, and even the most skeptical voices in the room had to acknowledge her ability. But even as she earned their respect, Jasmine never forgot the struggle she had faced to get there. She knew that her journey was part of a larger narrative, a narrative of perseverance, of breaking barriers, and of showing the world that leadership didn't have a color or a gender. Leadership was defined by vision, by heart, and by the willingness to take risks and make hard choices. In the months that followed, Jasmine continued to rise in the ranks, gaining more influence and more responsibility. Her leadership wasn't just changing the company, it was changing the culture. She implemented policies that promoted diversity, equity, and inclusion, ensuring that others who followed her path wouldn't have to endure the same subtle, institutionalized discrimination that she had faced. She hired people of color, women, and individuals from marginalized backgrounds, making sure that everyone had an equal shot at success. But for Jasmine, the most powerful change was within herself. She had spent years battling self-doubt, wondering if she was truly good enough, questioning whether she was capable of leading in such a high-pressure environment. But with every challenge she overcame, every moment of doubt she silenced, she began to see herself not just as a leader, but as a trailblazer, someone who had proven that the world wasn't just ready for change. It was begging for it. Jasmine's promotion wasn't just a personal victory. It was a symbolic moment for the entire company. The announcement that she would be stepping into a leadership role sent ripples through the organization. For some, it was a moment of recognition, a sign that hard work, dedication, and merit would always be rewarded. For others, it was a shock, a challenge to their long-held assumptions about who could be in charge and what leadership looked like. When the announcement was made, there were mixed reactions. Some of her colleagues, especially those who had dismissed her or doubted her ability, were visibly stunned. They had seen Jasmine as an ally in the trenches, a reliable team player who was always willing to lend a hand or give advice. But to be her equal, to answer to her, that was a shift they hadn't anticipated. Their minds began to race, perhaps questioning their past behavior, perhaps grappling with their own feelings of inadequacy in comparison. Jasmine's rise wasn't just a personal victory. It was a challenge to the established hierarchy, a breaking of the glass ceiling that many had long considered unbreakable. As Jasmine walked into her first meeting as the new boss, she could feel the tension in the air. She had prepared herself for this moment, mentally, emotionally, and professionally. But nothing could quite prepare her for the look on the faces of her colleagues when they saw her sitting at the head of the table. She had earned her seat there, but the old dynamics of the office were hard to shake. Her new position wasn't just about the responsibilities and the power it came with. It was about changing the way things had always been done. She immediately set to work transforming the company culture. Where there had been tension and division, she fostered an environment of collaboration and mutual respect. She was quick to listen and slow to judge, understanding that leadership was not about asserting dominance, but about empowering others. The first major decision Jasmine had to make as the new boss was one that many feared would be unpopular. A new project had been greenlit, and the team that had been assigned to it was one of the most established in the company. They had a history of success, but Jasmine saw that they were becoming stagnant, relying on outdated methods and strategies. In a bold move, she restructured the team, replacing some key members with individuals who brought fresh perspectives and new ideas. It was a risky decision, one that could have easily backfired, but Jasmine was resolute in her belief that change was necessary for growth. Her decision didn't go over well with everyone. The senior members of the team, many of whom had been with the company for years, resented the sudden shakeup. They questioned her judgment, her approach, and even her qualifications. Some of them were openly hostile, undermining her in meetings and trying to discredit her decisions. But Jasmine had learned long ago how to navigate such opposition. She refused to be intimidated by their resistance. She kept her focus on the bigger picture, the success of the company, the well-being of her team, and the opportunities for everyone to thrive. As the months went by, Jasmine's leadership began to speak for itself. The new project under the revamped team turned out to be a massive success. Not only did it exceed expectations, but it also set the company on a new trajectory, one that was more innovative, more inclusive, and more agile. Her decisions, though initially met with resistance, had proven to be the right ones. Slowly but surely, her colleagues began to realize that Jasmine wasn't just a token leader. She was a visionary, someone who understood the pulse of the company and the needs of her team. Despite the success, Jasmine still faced challenges as she navigated her new role. The old dynamics didn't disappear overnight. She had to constantly prove herself, her competence, her authority, and her worth. Every decision she made was scrutinized, every move second-guessed. But Jasmine was unshaken. She had been through too much to let the small-minded doubts of others define her. She had worked too hard, fought too many battles, and overcome too many barriers to let anything or anyone stop her now. What was most remarkable about Jasmine's rise was not just the fact that she had become the boss, but the way she did it. She had done it on her own terms, by staying true to herself, by remaining grounded in her values, and by using every setback as an opportunity to grow stronger. She never allowed the mockery and the doubts to break her spirit. Instead, she used them as fuel to propel herself forward, to prove that she was more than capable of leading with grace, wisdom, and integrity. As she sat at the head of the table, leading her team with confidence and clarity, Jasmine realized that this was just the beginning. She had not only earned her place at the top, she had paved the way for others to follow in her footsteps. Jasmine's story was one of defiance, resilience, and empowerment, a story that would continue to inspire future generations of leaders, particularly Black women, to believe in their own power, to challenge the status quo, and to rise above the obstacles that sought to keep them down. Her journey was far from over. Jasmine knew that leadership was not a destination. It was a continuous process of growth, learning, and transformation. And with every decision she made, every challenge she overcame, and every victory she claimed, Jasmine proved that the future belonged to those who dared to defy the odds, to break the molds, and to lead with authenticity and purpose. Jasmine's rise to the top was no accident. It was the culmination of years of perseverance, self-belief, and a deep understanding of what true leadership meant. She wasn't just interested in climbing the corporate ladder for her own gain. Her vision was far greater. She wanted to change the narrative, to redefine what success looked like, and to prove that greatness was not reserved for a select few, but accessible to anyone willing to work for it, regardless of their background, race, or gender. Months into her new role as boss, Jasmine's presence in the company began to be felt more and more. It wasn't just the team's success that stood as a testament to her leadership. It was the way people spoke about her. Those who had once doubted her, those who had mocked her and underestimated her abilities, were beginning to see the depth of her wisdom. They saw her for what she truly was, a leader who listened, understood, and, most importantly, empowered those around her. The ripple effect of Jasmine's leadership wasn't confined to just her team. Her impact spread across departments, creating a cultural shift within the organization. People began to trust each other more. They started collaborating more freely, sharing ideas, and working towards common goals. Jasmine's commitment to inclusivity and her unyielding belief in the power of diverse perspectives created an environment where innovation thrived. Under her guidance, the company transformed from an environment where traditional hierarchies stifled creativity to one where individuals were encouraged to think outside the box, challenge norms, and contribute meaningfully to the company's success. Yet, as much as Jasmine enjoyed the transformation of her workplace, she never allowed herself to get too comfortable. She knew that the corporate world, especially for women of color, could be unforgiving. There were always new battles to fight, new challenges to overcome. But Jasmine was no longer the person who would shrink in the face of adversity. She was now a force to be reckoned with, someone who had proven not just to her colleagues, but to herself that her voice mattered. She had turned her detractors into believers, and in doing so, had built a foundation for a legacy that would last far beyond her tenure. One of the most powerful aspects of Jasmine's leadership was her ability to lift others up along the way. She didn't see her success as a singular achievement. She saw it as part of a larger mission to pave the way for others, especially Black women, who had been historically overlooked and underestimated in the corporate world. Jasmine took the time to mentor young women in the company, helping them develop their skills, navigate challenges, and build the confidence to pursue leadership roles themselves. She became a role model, not just for her direct reports, but for women across the company who saw her as proof that it was possible to break through the glass ceiling. Jasmine knew that her success would only be truly meaningful if it inspired others to reach for their own dreams, to believe in their own power, and to challenge the norms that had for so long held them back. Even as she navigated the complexities of her role, Jasmine never lost sight of the values that had guided her journey from the very beginning: integrity, empathy, and a commitment to fairness. She didn't just want to be respected for her position. She wanted to be admired for the way she led. She worked tirelessly to build a culture of respect and mutual support. She made sure that every voice in the room was heard and that everyone had the opportunity to contribute and grow. Jasmine's leadership wasn't about playing by the old rules. It was about creating new ones. She redefined what it meant to be a boss, showing that authority didn't have to come at the expense of kindness, humility, or collaboration. She didn't lead with fear. She led with purpose, compassion, and a deep understanding of what it took to inspire others to be their best selves. Her story, one of overcoming adversity, defying expectations, and challenging systemic barriers, resonated beyond the walls of her company. It became a beacon of hope for those who felt overlooked or marginalized in their own workplaces. Jasmine's triumph was a reminder that no matter how impossible the road may seem, the power to change the course of one's life is always within reach. All it takes is the courage to stand up, the strength to rise above the noise, and the wisdom to know that true leadership comes from within. By the time Jasmine's legacy was fully realized, it was clear to everyone who had ever doubted her. She was more than just a boss. She was a pioneer, a leader who had created a lasting impact not only on her company, but on an entire industry. Her story was one of resilience, of perseverance, and of the power of believing in oneself even when the world seems set on telling you that you don't belong. Jasmine had started as a woman mocked, underestimated, and dismissed. She had ended as a force to be reckoned with, a leader who had shattered expectations, empowered others, and shown that true greatness is about more than just titles or positions. It's about making a difference, lifting others as you rise, and proving that, no matter the obstacles, your story can be one of triumph.